Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I bought a remote lakeside cabin to escape the chaos of city life, I thought I was finally free. No neighbors, no rules, just silence. Then a mysterious HOA I'd never heard of showed up, demanding I obey or leave. What they didn't know, they were trespassing on my empire. I bought the cabin to get away from all this crap. No board meetings, no arguments over lawn height. No neighbors swinging by to ask if I'd consider repainting the mailbox to match the aesthetic. I'd spent 20 years in city projects and HOA-regulated developments as an engineer, watching overpaid committee heads argue over rock colors in flower beds. So after the divorce, I was done. I wanted trees, water, silence, and land that nobody could tell me what to do with. That's what I thought I was buying. The log cabin sat alone on a bluff over Lake Silvero in Washington, thick forest behind it, and a calm, glittering lake in front. Accessed by a private gravel road with a rusting gate, the place had been county-owned for decades before I bought it directly through the state surplus program. I renovated it over the course of 6 months, fixed up the stone fireplace, added steel reinforcements to the deck, modernized the plumbing and solar. The real gem, though, was the deed. A clean title, no HOA, no easements, no strings attached. Just me and nature. So when I got a letter in the mail 3 months after settling in, claiming I was violating the regulations of Plot 18B, I actually chuckled. The envelope had a little blue and silver logo on it. HOA, Lakeview Shores Community Association. I'd never heard of them. I figured someone had entered an address wrong in some system and it would sort itself out. I tossed the letter on top of a pile of utility statements and didn't think twice. A week later, I came back from a supply run in town and found a bright orange sticker slapped on my front gate. Notice of violation, non-compliant landscaping and unauthorized structures. Failure to comply may result in action to reclaim usage. Reclaim usage, that raised a brow. I ripped the sticker off and tossed it into the bed of my truck. It wasn't just official looking, it was aggressive. And tucked under the welcome mat on my porch, I found a tri-fold printout with the same HOA logo and a highlighted clause. Continued failure to acknowledge community standards may initiate a reassessment of residential occupation rights. I stood there, barefoot on my own damn porch, reading bureaucratic gibberish written like they were about to stage a siege. That's when she showed up, Karen Spaulding. She pulled up in a pearl-white Lexus SUV with tinted windows, wearing a blazer over a polo shirt like she was headed to a realtor convention. Clipboard in hand, she didn't even bother introducing herself, just marched up the path like she owned it. "Mr. Weston, I presume?" she asked, not waiting for a yes. "I'm here on behalf of the Lakeview Shores HOA Committee. We've reviewed the latest jurisdiction update, and your parcel appears to now fall under community oversight, specifically as Plot 18. I blinked. "I'm sorry, under what authority?" I asked. "This land's been privately held for over 20 years. I bought it directly from the county. There is no HOA jurisdiction here." She smiled the kind of smile that made you want to check your pockets. "That's a common misconception. The committee recently passed a boundary revision ordinance and submitted the changes to the county office. You should have received an orientation packet. You think you can just revise property lines?" I asked, arms crossed. "The community has spoken," she said, like that settled it. "And we expect all members to do their part. That includes trimming back lakefront vegetation, painting non-compliant structures, and removing any unregistered modifications to the shoreline path." I laughed, a real sharp, involuntary laugh. "Lady, this cabin isn't even on your side of the lake, and there's no shoreline path. You're trespassing." Her expression didn't twitch. "If you're unwilling to collaborate as a member, the committee may be forced to initiate compliance steps." "You're about one step from getting escorted off my land by the county sheriff," I replied flatly. "This property is outside of Lakeview Shores. I have the deed, the map, and a signed letter from the land office. You don't get to make up rules here." Karen didn't flinch. She just scribbled something on her clipboard, turned, and walked back to her SUV. "Have it your way," she said over her shoulder, "but non-participation will not be tolerated forever." I watched her drive off, tires crunching over the gravel. My dog, Scout, came trotting out from behind the shed, ears perked, like he knew something was off. I gave him a scratch behind the ears, my eyes still locked on the road where she'd disappeared. I'd dealt with control freaks before, but this wasn't just some neighbor with too much free time. Something told me Karen wasn't going to go away quietly. 3 days later, I got a letter from a law firm called Brainer and Holt LLP, stamped in fancy gold foil like they thought that would make it more legitimate. Inside was a 2-page document full of HOA legalese that boiled down to this: your continued unauthorized presence on Parcel 18B is in direct violation of Section 7.4 of the Lakeview Shores Community Guidelines. You have 10 days to vacate the premises voluntarily. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal proceedings to reclaim the property on behalf of the association. They weren't even pretending anymore. They were talking about evicting me from my own damn cabin. Attached to the letter was a map I'd never seen before. My land, they claimed, was now part of something called a temporary association maintenance zone, shaded in light green, like that was going to make it look legitimate. But the borders were all wrong. They'd carved their own neighborhood boundaries halfway up my driveway. My cabin was literally sitting in the middle of their fantasy HOA empire. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so dangerous. I wasn't about to let this slide. I called my attorney, Alex Borman, a sharp real estate litigator I'd worked with years ago when one of my clients tried to sue the city over a broken retaining wall. Alex took one look at the documents and muttered, "This is a land grab with a smiley face. Give me 48 hours. While he went to work, I took a drive down to the county assessor's office with a folder full of my original deeds, GIS plats, title history, and the transfer document from the state auction. I asked them to run a boundary check and verify if there had been any legal amendments filed. There hadn't. No changes, no hearings, no redistricting. My property, Lot 17 per county record, was completely independent. Never part of Lakeview Shores, never reassigned. The county clerk actually snorted when she saw the HOA letter. "You'd be surprised how many of these we get," she said. "Some of these associations think they can annex whatever they want if nobody pushes back." I left with a notarized boundary affidavit under my arm and a new level of resolve in my chest. That evening, while checking the perimeter on foot with Scout, I found something new on my property: a plastic stake with an orange flag, the kind used for marking survey lines. Next to it, a laminated HOA card was zip-tied to a tree with the text, "Pending committee review, proposed grounds reassignment." My hands clenched. I didn't care if it was just for show. That was my tree, on my land. I ripped it down and went straight to my laptop. Within the hour, I'd scanned every relevant document, compiled a PDF with timestamps, and forwarded everything to Alex. I also included security cam screenshots from the trail camera I'd mounted at the southern path, which showed someone, possibly Karen, trespassing and marking the trees while I was in town. By the next morning, Alex had already fired back. He sent a formal cease and desist to both the HOA and their law firm, citing fraudulent misrepresentation, illegal boundary manipulation, and harassment. He attached the county's affidavit, demanded they withdraw their claim within 72 hours, and warned that any further contact would be considered legal intimidation. But they didn't stop. 2 days later, I came home from a supply pickup and found a red HOA envelope taped to my front door. Final warning before legal enforcement. The envelope wasn't postmarked. Someone had walked it up to my house. It smelled like Karen's perfume and desperation. Inside was a single sheet, printed in bold, passive-aggressive language. "Your failure to participate in the community structure of Lakeview Shores constitutes a breakdown in shared standards and endangers cohesion. You are strongly advised to cease obstruction, or we will be forced to proceed with property reclamation." I stared at the paper, then crumpled it slowly in my hand. That was the moment I stopped reacting and started planning. That night, I opened up my company's old property records. West Pro Holdings, my holding firm, hadn't done much lately, but it still held a few assets I hadn't touched in years. I wanted to review everything. It wasn't because I expected to find something useful. It was because I wanted to remind myself exactly what I owned in this area. I had no idea what I was about to discover. I didn't expect to find anything. I really didn't. I was combing through a stack of old property folders, digital scans from my company's asset files. West Pro Holdings had acquired a handful of surplus sites over the years, mostly for potential development or long-term leasing. I'd let most of it sit idle after the divorce. Out of sight, out of paperwork. But now I was digging. And there it was. Folder labeled Parcel Number 11B, South Ridge Utility Complex. I opened the file. Coordinates matched a backroad lot near Lakeview Shores. Original purchase, public surplus auction 12 years ago. Buyer of record, West Pro Holdings. That was me. The site was a prefab commercial structure, formerly used as a DMV satellite office. Last known use, leased for temporary administrative operations. I hadn't touched the place since acquiring it. It just sat on the books, collecting dust. But when I pulled up the location in satellite view, my stomach flipped. That prefab unit? It was the current headquarters of the Lakeview Shores HOA. I blinked twice, zoomed in to make sure. Same roofline, same parking pad. Their sign out front, Community Relations Office, visible right in the damn street view photo. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. I owned their office. They were squatting in my damn building. I spent the next hour verifying everything. The lease agreement, done through a third-party management firm I'd used years ago. HOA had signed a 5-year lease with automatic month-to-month rollover. No right of purchase, no long-term security, just a basic occupancy agreement. Rent was dirt cheap, below market, likely to help fill a vacancy back then. But it got better. They hadn't paid rent in 2 months. Late notices had been emailed to a generic address and ignored. The last inspection form was 2 years old. No permits for interior remodels, no notices of occupancy extension, no request for signage changes. They'd done all of it without permission. I sat there staring at the monitor, letting it all sink in. These idiots tried to evict me from my cabin without realizing they were sitting inside a building I legally owned. I grinned. Not just a little smile, a full, slow, don't mess with me grin that spread across my face like fire catching dry leaves. Scout cocked his head from the corner of the room, like he could smell the shift in air pressure. I emailed Alex immediately with a subject line that read, HOA office equals my building. He called me 5 minutes later. You're kidding? Nope. Tell me they're behind on rent. 61 days and counting. He laughed. You ready to flip the switch? More than ready. We got to work. Alex drafted a formal notice of lease termination citing non-payment, unauthorized modifications, and failure to maintain communication. Under the original lease terms, I had every legal right to revoke access with 72 hours notice and pursue back payments plus damages. We also filed a notice of inspection with the county to be conducted before reoccupation by any tenant. That meant even if the HOA fought the eviction, they'd be locked out of the building until a certified inspection passed, which, given their hacksaw renovations and amateur signage, was going to be a long shot. But I didn't stop there. I pulled up every public filing the HOA had submitted in the last 5 years. They listed that building, my building, as their official legal address for all business, tax, and community filings. I made a list of every agency they'd reported that address to. Then I drafted my own letters, one by one, to the county clerk, to the property tax assessor, to the Washington State Department of Revenue, to the IRS. Each stated clearly that the HOA no longer had valid rights to occupy or represent business activity at that location. Alex scheduled a process server. We were going to hand deliver the notice of termination personally to the HOA office. I was going to knock on their door in broad daylight and give them 72 hours to vacate. And I wasn't going alone. It was a Thursday morning when I pulled into the HOA parking lot. The place looked just as smug as I remembered from photos. Trimmed hedges, fake stone planters, a polished bronze sign out front that read Lakeview Shores Administrative Offices, as if that elevated them to some municipal authority instead of a bunch of self-important lawn inspectors playing dress-up. I stepped out of my truck in jeans, work boots, and a button-down, the kind of outfit that says I've been in court before, and I brought receipts. Alex followed behind, briefcase in one hand, formal eviction packet in the other. Our process server, Dean, was already waiting by the front door, sipping from a travel mug with a bald eagle on it. Ready to ruin a suburban empire, he asked. Lead the way, I said. We walked straight in through the glass doors. The lobby looked like someone's idea of luxury on a bake sale budget. Faux leather chairs, inspirational posters about community spirit, and a tiny reception desk with a very startled-looking 20-something woman behind it. Can I help you? She asked, clearly unsure if we were here to install something or tear the building down. Yes, Alex said smoothly. We're here to serve legal notice to the Lakeview Shores Homeowners Association. Is Ms. Spaulding in? She picked up the phone, pressed a button, mumbled something, and hung up quickly. She'll be right out. Moments later, Karen appeared. Her expression shifted through a full slideshow of confusion, recognition, irritation, and finally, poorly masked dread. "Mr. Weston," she said, her voice tight. "We weren't expecting—" I didn't let her finish. "You're being evicted." Alex handed her the folder. "You're currently occupying a commercial property owned by Westpro Holdings, which Mr. Weston owns in full. As per the original lease agreement signed in 2011 and extended in 2016, you are in violation due to non-payment, unauthorized structural changes, and failure to renew under the standard terms. You have 72 hours to vacate." Karen opened the folder, flipping through the documents as if sheer disbelief would turn them blank. This is absurd. We've been using this office for years." "Exactly," I said. "And you've been underpaying, ignoring your obligations, and renovating a building you don't own. Hell, you're lucky we're not locking the doors right now." Her face twisted. "You can't just throw us out. We're a legal homeowners association." "You're a legal tenant," Alex replied coolly. "And now you're an illegal one." Karen turned toward the hall behind her and snapped, "George, get in here." A balding man in a blazer, I recognized him from their newsletter photos, appeared a moment later, looking like he'd just come out of a finance meeting or maybe a Botox seminar. "Karen, what's—" "Tell them they can't do this," she barked, shoving the folder at him. He scanned the front page. His face paled. "Oh, God. What?" He looked at me, then at Alex, then back at Karen. "She owns the building. It's in the lease file. I saw it when I signed the extension." "You what?" Karen hissed. "I thought you knew. The property manager said." Karen snatched the folder back and stormed into her office, slamming the door so hard a framed certificate fell off the wall. Everyone in the lobby went dead silent. The receptionist stared at me like I'd just kicked in the door of her childhood home. Alex turned to Dean. "Consider them officially served." We walked out into the crisp air. "Think she's going to fight it?" I asked. "She doesn't have the leverage to sneeze without legal blowback," Alex said. But I wasn't so sure. Karen didn't strike me as the kind of person who surrendered. I figured she'd fight this tooth and nail, not for the office, but for control. Losing the building meant more than just moving furniture. It meant being humiliated in front of her HOA kingdom. And based on what I'd seen so far, she'd burn the place down before letting that happen. Still, she had 72 hours, and the clock was ticking. 2 days later, my phone buzzed while I was fixing a busted gutter on the back deck. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Mr. Weston," the voice said. Male, calm. "My name is David Kenter. I'm on the Lakeview Shores HOA board. I'd like to talk." I wiped my hands on a rag and sat down on the stairs. "Talk about what?" "I think you're about to bring the whole damn thing down," he said. "And I think it should fall. But before it does, you should know what's really going on. I've got documentation. You'll want to see it." We met later that afternoon at a coffee shop in town, neutral ground. David looked exhausted. He was maybe mid-40s, khakis, and a sweatshirt with a university logo. A man who joined the HOA board to help out and realized too late that he'd volunteered for a slow-motion coup. He pulled out a thumb drive and slid it across the table. "I backed up everything I could from our internal system before Karen locked us out." "Locked you out?" He nodded. "She changed the admin passwords. Even board members can't see the finances now." "What's on this?" "Emails, bank statements, redlined property maps, scanned complaints. You'll find your name in there more than once." That night, I plugged the drive into my laptop and spent the next 4 hours swimming through what could only be described as HOA malpractice on steroids. There were maps, fake ones, with handwritten notes like Consolidate Zone 18B, reassign as Community Lakefront. In one email, Karen wrote to a local real estate agent, "If we can pressure Weston out, we'll have an unobstructed shoreline strip." Imagine the listing value with that view restored. Another message to the same agent. "We're working on pushing jurisdiction. He's isolated and won't have the resources to fight." Guess again, sweetheart. Even worse, there were other victims. I found at least 3 other property owners who'd been mistakenly added to HOA dues, complete with threats of liens and late fees. One family had paid over $8,000 in fees for services they never requested. Another had been told they'd lose trash pickup if they didn't come into compliance, despite arranging their own waste contract years ago. The pièce de résistance, a spreadsheet tracking future reclaimable parcels, including mine, marked as priority. I shared everything with Alex the next morning. He didn't just look satisfied, he looked energized. "We're filing criminal referrals," he said. "This is wire fraud, property manipulation, and textbook racketeering." He fired off a formal complaint to the county prosecutor's office and also looped in the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions. Fraudulent HOA actions fall directly under their oversight. Meanwhile, I contacted the 3 other victims, found them through property records and some light Googling. All of them had the same stunned reaction. I thought it was just us. They agreed to testify if it went to trial. One of them, a retired Air Force colonel, even sent me a signed affidavit and said, "Give her hell." I plan to. By Saturday morning, a county code enforcement vehicle rolled up to the HOA office, my building, along with 2 inspectors carrying clipboards and tape measures. The receptionist tried to block them at the door. Didn't work. I watched from my truck as they went inside, notebooks out, flashlights checking wiring and vents. 20 minutes later, one of the inspectors came out shaking his head. "No smoke alarms, illegal wall modifications, and they hardwired a mini fridge into a panel labeled for emergency lighting." "On the record?" I asked. "Oh yeah," he said. "This place shouldn't be open." The notice went up on the door that afternoon. Property closed, pending inspection compliance. Karen was nowhere in sight, but the dominoes had started to fall. It was early Monday morning when the screaming started. Not at my cabin. I was parked across the street from the HOA office, sipping coffee from a thermos, waiting for county enforcement to return for a follow-up. I saw a silver Lexus screech into the lot, barely miss a trash bin, and Karen Spaulding exploded out of the driver's seat like a hornet with a blowtorch. She stomped to the office door, read the property close notice, and shrieked, "Who put this here? This is private property." I rolled down my window and calmly called out, "Actually, it's my property." "Morning, Karen." She spun around like she'd seen a ghost. "You?" she hissed, storming toward my truck. "You're trespassing." I leaned back with the kind of smile you reserve for tax audits and bad exes. "Karen, you've been operating an HOA office in a building owned by my company without a legal lease. As of this morning, your 60-day overdue rent, code violations, and unauthorized electrical modifications have nullified your occupancy. You've got 72 hours to vacate per your contract. And before you scream illegal eviction, check Section 9B. I held up a crisp manila envelope and handed it to her when she got close enough. Inside, a formal eviction notice and termination of lease with cause. Prepared, signed, and served in accordance with Washington state law. Her eyes darted across the page. "This is a joke. I'll sue you for harassment. You're doing this because I tried to enforce community standards." "Community standards?" I raised an eyebrow. "You tried to forge my property into your HOA maps and evict me from my legal home. That's not standards. That's fraud." She actually tore the notice in half and threw it on the ground, which, ironically, only helped my case. I had a dash cam rolling the entire time, but Karen wasn't done. An hour later, I got served, or at least someone tried to. A courier handed me a cease and desist order from a law firm called Patterson and Breyer. The letter claimed that my actions were disrupting vital community operations and that I was interfering with protected administrative functions. I nearly laughed. The wording was vague, bloated, and clearly designed to intimidate rather than hold up in court. I forwarded it to Alex, who replied 15 minutes later, already drafted a response. "This is garbage. Let them try. We'll counter with fraud, forgery, breach of contract, and retaliation." Then came the real kicker. Karen and her board filed a temporary injunction motion with the county court, asking a judge to block me from taking action against the HOA and to restore their office access in the public interest. Their argument? That my ownership of the building was suddenly disclosed and that I was using it as a personal vendetta to undermine community leadership. It backfired. The judge set a hearing in 4 days but refused to grant any emergency relief. In the meantime, my eviction order stood. The next morning, I visited the property again. This time, there were 2 moving vans parked out front and HOA staff loading boxes. The door was propped open, and inside I could see shelves being stripped, coffee machines unplugged, even the tacky fake plant by the door being wheeled out. Karen stood in the middle of it all, red-faced, barking orders like a derailed drill sergeant. She saw me across the street. She didn't yell, she didn't wave, she just stared. And I realized this wasn't just about my cabin anymore. This was about an entire little empire she'd built, one fraudulent document at a time, and now it was collapsing. Before I left, I handed a second copy of the eviction notice to the movers, just to make sure the documentation was in order. One of them, a guy named Pete, shook his head and muttered, "Man, I don't know what they did, but this place feels cursed." He wasn't wrong. The courtroom was packed. Folding chairs lined the back wall, and a few folks even stood in the hallway, craning their necks to hear. I spotted at least 4 familiar faces from the neighborhood, including the retired Air Force colonel I'd spoken to a week earlier. He gave me a slow, silent nod as I walked past. Karen sat 2 tables away, flanked by 2 lawyers in suits that looked expensive and overcompensating. She wore her signature pastel blazer and that smug, brittle expression, like she still believed she could outmaneuver gravity. The judge, Honorable Elena Woodburn, was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s with ice-white hair and a reputation for hating HOA overreach. I'd done my homework. Karen's attorneys opened with a dramatic, bloated monologue about emotional distress, targeted harassment, and intentional sabotage of community cohesion. They painted me as a vengeful recluse, weaponizing legal loopholes to dismantle a vital civic institution. They said the lease was unclear, my eviction notice retaliatory, and that the HOA office performed essential governmental-like duties that could not be suspended without harm to the residents. Woodburn didn't blink once. When Alex got up, he didn't start with drama. He started with facts. "Your Honor," he said, holding up the signed lease agreement. "My client is the sole legal owner of the structure in question. The HOA's use of it was permissive, unpaid beyond 60 days, and directly in violation of Sections 4 and 9. Here's the termination clause." He passed the document up. The judge barely glanced at it before nodding. Then he went in for the kill. "Furthermore," Alex said, "we've provided evidence to the county prosecutor, the Department of Financial Institutions, and now this court, that the HOA, under Ms. Spaulding's leadership, engaged in deliberate fraud, including falsified maps, forged property designations, and illegal collection of dues from non-members." He clicked a remote, and the flat screen beside the judge lit up with images. Forged boundary maps, annotated with Karen's handwriting. Bank statements showing the HOA account funneling money into a consulting firm registered to her cousin. Emails discussing how to pressure out Weston and convert his shoreline. Karen's face drained of color. Alex called up our first witness, David Kenter. He took the stand calmly, stating his position as former board member, and confirmed everything. He spoke about the internal lockouts, the secret meetings, the misappropriated funds. Then came Sarah Harlan, one of the falsely billed residents. "I received over 15 notices threatening liens," she said. "They knew I wasn't part of their HOA. I told them multiple times. They didn't care." Next came Colonel Rowe with military precision. "She altered maps," he said bluntly. "Tried to put my dock inside their so-called jurisdiction. I've got aerial footage from 3 decades back. That shoreline's always been mine. It wasn't just evidence. It was a massacre." Karen's lawyers looked like they wanted to disappear. She, on the other hand, looked like she was calculating. Like maybe she still thought there was some card left to play. Then came the judge's turn. "I've seen enough," Woodburn said, closing the folder before her. "The HOA's emergency injunction is denied. Mr. Weston acted within his rights as landlord and property owner. Furthermore," she turned her gaze directly to Karen, "I'm referring this matter to the county prosecutor for review of potential criminal charges. The allegations of fraud, forgery, and financial abuse will be investigated under full subpoena authority." You could hear a pin drop. Karen didn't flinch, but her hands gripped the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Court adjourned. As I stepped outside, 3 reporters tried to corner me. I didn't stop. I had no interest in headlines. Not yet. But I did see Karen out of the corner of my eye, being approached by a plainclothes deputy who handed her a folded document. She unfolded it. Summons. The kind that makes your stomach turn cold. It took less than 3 weeks for the first domino to fall. Karen Spaulding was arrested outside her home at 7:42 a.m. on a Thursday. The county sheriff's office didn't make a big show of it. No sirens, no shouting, just 2 deputies, a warrant, and a very shocked-looking Karen in a bathrobe trying to act like this was all a mistake. It wasn't. The charges hit the news by noon. 4 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of falsifying legal documents, conspiracy to defraud, and criminal misuse of HOA funds. The investigators had followed the money, the consulting firm she'd funneled cash into. Fake. The boundary documents? Forged. The dues collected from non-members? Illegal as hell. They even found bribery attempts tied to a local permitting office, where she'd apparently tried to get my cabin tagged as a non-compliant dwelling, just to evict me. Every dirty little scheme unraveled in public view. By the time her trial began, 6 other residents had filed formal complaints. 3 former board members testified against her. Her own vice president turned on her for a plea deal. The verdict came fast. Guilty. Sentence: 10 years in state prison with restitution to be paid to affected property owners, including me. That part was oddly satisfying. Not because I needed the money, I didn't, but because for once someone like her wasn't walking away with a slap on the wrist. But the victory didn't stop there. After the HOA was dissolved by court order, citing systemic fraud and hostile governance, the county held a vote. A special meeting. I showed up, half out of curiosity, half out of caution. That's when they asked me if I wanted to oversee the transition of the dissolved HOA's remaining functions: permits, shared road upkeep, the dock area. Apparently, I was the only one they trusted not to exploit it. I said no. Then I made them an offer: lease the dock land back to them for $1 per year, with no strings attached, as long as they formed a simple road association, not a governing body. They agreed. I didn't want power, I just wanted peace. A week later, I sat on my porch watching the water, my dog snoring next to me, and the wind stirring the trees. No more patrols, no more threats, no more fake maps, just quiet. Then I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, a county clerk delivering a certified letter, final closure on the civil suit. I opened it. The court awarded me $330,000 in damages to be paid by Karen's estate and the dissolved HOA's assets. I laughed, and then I framed the notice and hung it right next to my front door, next to the original deed to my cabin dated 23 years ago. So if anyone comes knocking again, asking who owns this land, I'll just point at the wall.